Hi, this is Paul. I have John Heers with me. I saw John talking to Jonathan Peugeot, and he seemed to have a personality, unlike some people on the internet. And so I wanted to talk to him. And then a mutual friend of ours, Sarah, who's been on the channel, and she's familiar among the Randos United channel, said, "Oh, I'm on his board." And I thought, he's got a board. My goodness, is he that unruly that he needs a board to govern over him? And then there's just something about rabbits. So I knew I had to dive into this, and I warned him. I said, I don't know if you've ever seen my first conversation with Peugeot, but I'm a very nosy pastor. I ask a lot of personal questions.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I'm getting ready. I'm getting nervous too.
You kind of remind me of Mark Maron.
Mark Maron?
Yeah, you do.
Is that a good thing?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. You sound like him. You got a voice like Mark Maron.
You have heard this before, but you have gone full Kris Kringle on people.
Yeah, so I know that too.
By the way, but I know you from this whole Peugeot rabble, and I have to say you're the favorite of the rabble in my mind. You're the one when you come on that I really enjoy waiting to hear
thank you.
what you have to say. But I am terrified. You're gonna do, what did you call it on the email? Pastor, you're gonna invade my
interrogation.
That's right, pastoral interrogation.
I got this little Wi-Fi. My son was, we're working on all these projects at church, and my son was trying to do something to get a pipe underground, and I had bought this Wi-Fi endoscope. And I said, we could have a thriving business of, what colonoscopies cost these days? This is like $40 on Amazon. I mean, gosh, this and a little bit of a compressor to kind of puff the thing up. Yeah. Bang.
You won't even need any subscribers after that.
Well, John, I'm very curious about you, because when I first talked to Jonathan Peugeot, that's when I discovered his background in Africa, his time in Africa with Mennonite Central Committee. I had been a missionary in the Dominican Republic and had worked church development, but worked very closely with development people. And so let's get into it. Who is this?
Let's do it.
Who is this John Heers guy? Where were you? Where are you from? And what was the home you were raised in like?
Sure. Well, I moved a ton of times before I got out of high school. So I went to 3 high schools and then a number of middle schools, but I was born in the South in Fitzgerald, Georgia, to a Episcopal priest. He was high church, so we were taught to call him a priest and not a pastor. And he moved us around a lot. I think, I'll put it this way, Paul, he moved a ton, and then he converted to orthodoxy and moved one more time and died. Wow. He was in search of something. So we could talk about what he was in search of, but he definitely was a moving character. My wife, my mother was raised us in the home. She never had a quote job, but 3 of us. My brother is also an Orthodox priest. He took after my father. I grew up with a sister, and I would call us suburban, but we had a lot of fight in us. My mother was a fighter. My mother died only about a month ago, month and a half.
Sorry.
Yeah, we called her Presbytera of the South. Presbytera is, you know what that means.
Yeah.
It's the wife of the priest, basically. And she was famous for being the babushka, the one who would point out things in the church that needed to be fixed. And she was usually right. She usually caused me a lot of, I'm not that character. My brother and her are the ones that see the lines. I like to blur them. So,
okay. Yeah. So what was church life like? I mean, so I'm also, my father was also a pastor, and growing up in the household of the clergy is a different experience, and it varies quite a bit. What was that like for you?
My dad was not heavy on articulating gospel outside of the weekend. Like, okay. He loved football. He loves sports. He taught me that. I love sports. My mom, though, she reminded us about what was important. You know, there always talks about what it means to be married, what it means. And she was very much into the high church aspects of communion and things like that. So I never felt it wasn't an oppressive thing. I will say this, though, people knew me as a PK, you know, and that changes your own perspective. That change. So you react according to how you're known. And so I started to become a little bit rebellious in that way. I went to college and didn't go to, I don't think I went to church one time in 4 years. And so, well, but yeah, so not oppressive in any sense of the word, but we're Episcopalian too, you know, they roll easy.
So tell me about this transition your father made to orthodoxy.
Yeah. So this is the late 80s, early 90s, and he starts to basically, I think what a lot of people are doing right now, and it continues around the US, I think Pajot understands this pretty well, is started political for him. Ordination of women was not cool, and then abortion issues. And so he was basically very adamant about these, what I think he would call at the time, political positions. You know, the two natures of Christ, is that being challenged? Not really, although it does eventually, like guys like Bishop Spong and stuff. But for him, it was political, and my mother was very vociferous. And eventually what happened is, in order to avoid what they would call something like progressive theology, they thought about Catholicism, but then moved to Orthodoxy when they met a priest, Father Andrew. And basically they took their parish in, and they had a split. And this was out in California in the East Bay. They were in a pretty, I don't know if you know Concord, California, Walnut Creek. They had, you're Sacramento. So
yeah.
They had influential parishioners, and split the parish. And he was in a middle school gym trying to put up icons every weekend. And, you know, for you guys, when you
Protestants, you just go in the gym. You don't have to dress it up at all.
Just rip it.
That's right. Fun. All you need is the skinny jeans, the smoke machine, and the ripping guitarist, and you just have at it.
No. He had to wheel in icons every Sunday. It was tiring. It was getting old. So my mom always had energy. So basically, I was in Africa during all of that. I was in the Peace Corps.
Okay.
And so I was a government missionary.
Well, we're gonna back up. We gotta get fill in more story till we get you to Africa. So we're still on mom and dad.
I like it. I like your attention to detail. So basically, mom and dad then did that parish and got poor. My dad took a second and third job. Then he was mowing lawns for a while, like, you know, one of these big lawnmowers on a golf course. And basically that changed their life. I think there was an asceticism in it that they were pretty scared of, and then eventually proud of, or not proud is the wrong word. You get it, but
no, I get it.
So then I came home. Now my brother is a whole different conversation, but I came home after experiencing Islam in West Africa and started looking at them really interestingly and saying, what's going on here? And I felt like what happened was they became peaceful. Now, I'm not just saying that's because of Orthodoxy, but something like the political conversation started to end, better or worse. They ramped up again in the last couple of years of my mom's life because of this crazy time we're in. So
yeah.
That was how that looked.
How long ago did your father die?
He died in 2016.
Okay.
Preceded my mother by about, I guess, 5 years now.
Okay. How old was he when he died?
They were both, oh gosh, now I'm gonna get in trouble. Lord have mercy. They were both 81 or 82, right?
Okay.
In there.
Yeah. All right. So your father was almost exactly my father's age. My father died in 2013. This is going to be interesting because one of the things that I sensed when I was talking to you, or when I was listening to you, was I suspected there's going to be a lot of parallels in some of this, even though I'm over on the Protestant side. And so,
well, I want to ask you some questions about that.
If you want to have me have a rip at you, or you want to kind of go piece by piece.
No, keep going. I like the way you're doing this.
All right. So, high school, how'd that go for you?
I was a sensualist. I was trying to be the cool guy. in part. I don't know if I was rebelling as much. My mom liked the world. She could make food. Oh my gosh, she was a chef. So I took a lot of that in. I enjoyed high school. I wasn't popular in the sense. I think I got turned down 5 times, Paul, my junior year, trying to catch a date to the junior prom. That's a fact.
You
But
went to public school? Where?
Public school, Concord High School. Well, that was the
Concord.
last 2 years. Previously to that, I was in Wisconsin,
Oh,
Delvin Darien High School. And there was one other high school, a military school, where my mother thought she was going to give me a good education, but she didn't do her homework, because when I got there, it was what military schools are. It was a reform school, and I got like into fights. I'm not fighting anybody, and now I'm fighting people. And I was like, wow.
go the other way.
I think you just screwed something up. And so she pulled me out of there after about 8 months.
So what'd you do after high school?
I went to undergraduate in Wisconsin, back in Wisconsin, Ripon College. I studied politics and economics.
Okay.
And
you didn't go to church at all in high school?
I went one time the first week because I pledged. Met the priest, Little Episcopal Church in Ripon, Wisconsin. He seemed fine. And then I just drank a lot. Can I say that on this? I can say that.
You can say that. Oh gosh, that's weak sauce, my friend. With drink a lot, that's pretty normal.
By the way, I know that. I said that sort of just to give a jab. I've listened to you. I really yeah. No, I drank a lot. I found myself. I had a great time, but I think by senior year I was good at studying.
Okay.
The first 3 weren't.
Why politics?
I think I really truly believe the utopian notion that we can change the world, which I don't believe at all anymore.
Yeah.
It felt proper, and it was a good outlet for the empathy. I think I'm an empath. I don't know these things, but I'm told. And I think that is a good way to be an empath, is to try to fix the world. But so that was like politics were clean to me then. And so I think I wanted to use it in some fashion to do good.
Yeah. Yeah. So did that lead to the Peace Corps then?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Peace Corps was, well, first I went to grad school, and I was chasing my girlfriend. She went to a grad school on the East Coast, and I sort of went out there. I mean, look, I know these things now. At the time, I would have told you, I'm going to study the art of politics at New York University. Yeah, whatever. I want to get closer to Michelle. And then eventually I realized that wasn't the move. Well, she told me that's not the move. I was like, I came all the way out here. She's like, I know. And I got a new boyfriend. So I went to Africa. Thank you, Africa. Thank you, Molly.
So Peace Corps, I'll tell you, when I was in the Dominican Republic, my experience with young men in Peace Corps, they were chasing tail. I mean, boy, I'll tell you, in the Dominican Republic, young man, US passport.
And that place would be tough. I mean, all these places are tough. People are beautiful everywhere, but yeah. So what is that? Oh man, you really already opened me up, man. Hold on. Mom, I love you wherever you are. She knows some of this, but they had a Puritan strain to them. And so, well, that's something that's really interesting. And I wonder if it's the same for you. We could talk about anything philosophical. My mom and my father were really good at this. Our dinner table was of interest, I think, to people. But boy, if you hit sex or drinking or something, then it just just shuts down. And
wow,
that was tough. I think a lot of my life was trying to play that out and live it rather than talk, because I could never really talk about it. And that's not blaming them, but that definitely happened.
Okay, so you went to where did you go in Africa?
To Mali, to really traditional Muslim country in West Africa, right on the Sahel.
Yeah.
And wow, that was. Now I think I get into a spot in this life of mine, and thanks for asking. It's nice to have people ask about your life.
It is. People like it. That's why. I mean, people sometimes look at it and say, "You're awfully nosy." Now, people like it. People like talking about themselves, right? And it's important that they do, because every time you tell the story, it's like memories. Every time you tell the story, you craft it a little bit better. You know yourself a little bit more. So.
No doubt. And now with this thing we're doing, this foundation, I find people want to know, and kind of like for professional reasons. And you're right. You're right. The crafted story is different than the one. Yeah, it does. The iteration's nice. I agree with that. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Anyway, I got to Africa, and that was really fundamentally wonderful because it was hard. And I think that's part of what I think I learned about life. It was hard with no running water, no electricity too. It was what you think of as Peace Corps. You know, Peace Corps is changing right now, which is fine. The world's changing. Everybody's got a phone.
Yeah.
But man, like for instance, I didn't talk to my mother for 2 years. If I wrote a letter, it was a 3-month turnaround. There was no electricity, so there was no, you got a radio if you got batteries. Like it was serious, and it was a little village, about I would say about maybe 40 families, and so it was fantastically difficult and wonderful. And Islam, whoa, this was the obedience matrix. This was the concept of you do it because it's told. And Episcopalian, you think stuff out. We're gonna reason this for a little while. And I would ask who I thought were really well fully educated Muslim imams why something, and they would just say because Muhammad asks us to. But it wasn't awful. There was something about the obedience, pulling over in a taxi at 10 a.m. and just praying, and then again at 1. There was something in the obedience that made sense to me. I'm not saying I wanted to be a Muslim, but it was wild. It was. I didn't reject it for whatever reason.
What was your purported mission?
I was trained in water resource management.
Okay.
So my goal when I landed was to help folks to do reinforced well structures.
Okay.
And we also did some sewage and basically water resource stuff. But can I tell you a story about that?
Absolutely.
You want to keep going? Here's what happened to me though, Paul, is I tried to do those things.
This is the reason I use the word purported, because that's how it always starts.
Because this, right? And same with missionary work. You think one thing, your little little square, what is this, a foot around thing, thinks one thing, and then the whole world encroaches. But I just started digging these wells, and I got a team. I did what everybody told me to do. The United States government is a fine organization, but they're not too iterative. They're not too nimble. So basically, when I landed where I was, the water table was very high. And my Dugutiki, the chief, this wonderful guy with no teeth because he ate cola nuts all day long. But basically, he kept saying, we don't need those. But if you looked at the well, you and I would have been like, you could use some help with these. But I kept thinking he needed, let me show you, chief. First of all, I'm like 25-year-old guy telling the chief, it's nuts, right?
Yep.
It's nuts.
Yep.
But then what happened is this was really important. And it's important for this whole thing we're doing now. But basically, it became clear to me over 8 months that I could help them reinforce wells. They did not need it. They could find water in 15 minutes. Okay. And then the well could collapse. They didn't care. But what happened is while I was finding better wells, I was losing total respect. I was losing integrity with the chief and the other chiefs that were around, because I was sort of like a gift. I was sort of a shiny toy for this chief. And I kept not doing what he asked. And you know what he'd been asking me that I was not paying attention to? I was just not paying attention to it. It was the very first couple of weeks. He led me out way back through the mango fields to this bridge. It was a big bridge, a natural bridge built out of trees they chopped down in these forests they're not supposed to be in. And there was like an illegal bridge. But man, I learned over time that bridge united all the mango fields of these 5 villages that pressed against the Niger River. I didn't know. All I saw was this massive thing. And he's like, can you do a new bridge for us? And I was like, you must be crazy. I'm going to get somebody killed. I don't know about it. So I just rejected it. And eventually what I realized is that was the thing they needed, but I never would listen. Yeah. And so about a year in, I was going to get kicked out of the village. You don't understand. These guys had a good village. Like they were not in debt. They knew their business. The Dugutiki was articulate and they respected him. And they were like, why don't you just leave? And then I said, fine. And I went and found his French organization. They gave me like 25 grand in 1991 or whatever. That's a lot of money. And then I put a guy on a motorcycle, this young Peace Corps volunteer who was an engineer. His name was Omar. I still remember Omar's face because he wasn't supposed to go with me, but I like took him. And we drove out 4 hours and I had him do the survey with me for free. He's just this young guy from MIT. He just landed. And he looks at it and he's like, this is crazy. But he designed it for me. I took it to the French. They said, it looks good. Drove out these big semis filled with all this stuff. And that thing's standing right now.
Wow.
Changed my life. Changed my life.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And all I did is sit around, Paul. They had a Mason, and the Mason couldn't read or write very well. But you know what? He knew everything. Yeah. They all knew everything. I'll just leave you one last part because this is the best part of the story. And I really like this part because I feel it's like it's a metaphor for most things.
Yeah.
The thing I worried about was this 15-meter span. That's the part, that everyone thinks is the bridge, but they don't realize you got to be 50 meters on either side of the road. It's like a big project. So the 15 meters, for most people, that's not that big. In the West, like it's a baby thing. But there's no electricity, so there's no power tools of any kind. And they kept going, don't worry about it. We'll just elevate it. We'll use some sticks. And I'm like, whoa. No, I don't like that. So I kept trying to find another way to do it. Couldn't do it. So I said, okay, you guys do it. And they did it like they would have done it any other thing with all these hundreds of years. And you know what? It didn't break. In fact, it was stronger than probably I would have done it. Yeah. It changed me. Yeah. Like, stop it, man. You can't know everything. It was really cool.
Okay. So I mean, you're telling us what you learned, but keep telling us more of what that obviously was formative for you in terms of
big time.
And where that, how then did that change in terms of your trajectory, your path? Where did you go after the bridge?
So I got
because you were done. They had gotten out of you what they were looking for.
Yeah, and the thing though is as you know, that bound us together. I mean, the guy who I worked with, Bakari, who is just the most beautiful guy ever, but really country guy, really country. Never went to school even one day in his life. Lost his eye as a young kid. He came and stayed with us in New York. Talk about a miserable guy. He hated New York with a passion. He was cold. It was October. It wasn't even that cold. He was freezing all the time. But anyway, what happened is, first of all, I came back what I think all people need, that it was a sense of accomplishment. Mm-hmm. It was a sense of doing something. A lot of Peace Corps volunteers, they don't have that feeling. We can get into that, but I had that, thank God. But it wasn't just me. It was, and also really what it was language acquisition changed me a lot. So to do that job where we were way out in the bush, you couldn't speak French. There were no French speakers in that village. I had to speak Bambara. It was a variation on Mandingo or Malinke. To do the bridge, I had to know the language. And then to know the language is to know the people. But of course, not because you know one word for another, it's because you see how they weave thoughts. And one of the things I learned is that every reference is to nature in that part of the world. Almost all the metaphors are to nature. And so if you don't understand why the bird is flying in a certain way, you can't understand that whole conversation. And when you start to actually pick it up that way, I'll just put it like this way. My life became slow because I learned how to speak Bambara. I don't know if I can say it better. I slowed down or something because the language is built slow. It's built at rest. Our language, everything is like this. And so the words aren't important. It's the way they were expressing them. And it was really cool to slow down. I think I've been chasing that ever since on some level. It's not passivity. They're not passive. They're slow. Does that sound bad?
No, it doesn't sound bad at all. A lot of people are looking for slow. A lot of people are hungering and thirsting for slow.
Yes.
And they don't quite know what they're hungering and thirsting for, but they know it ain't fast.
Yeah, so I agree.
So how long were you there?
2 years and 4 months.
No, hardly any time.
No, not really. Yeah.
And then after what?
So I had the taste, the flavor of that work.
Okay.
Came home. I went to Columbia University, studied history. I was happy about that. I loved history, and then also that experience overseas taught me about culture, and so that was cool. And then I wound that into an education degree at Teachers College, and then basically I taught in the city. I started teaching in South Bronx High School, right across from Fort Apache, if you've ever seen that movie from the 70s. And it was tough and a great place. And then I started to feel like myself as a New Yorker. Yeah. But then I got called back. I couldn't really shake that flavor of work. And I went to the Georgian Republic for a year and a half during their Civil War. Oh, wow. 94, 95. And I worked for an organization called International Orthodox Christian Charities, because it was when I got back from Africa that my father had started to convert, and then I sort of followed him in.
How did you see your parents different when you came back from Africa? Or did
you?
Well,
one thing is my parents, I wouldn't call them like alpha parents. My mom is a type of alpha parent, but they were scrambling. They were sort of always in control, but they were scrambling because, you know, they didn't know the Orthodox Christian vernacular. They didn't know what to say, how to say it. They were suddenly like starting over. And so I came really close to them during that period when they were trying to find themselves, just before I went off to college. I found them slower.
Yeah. I believe you did.
Less in control.
Yeah. In a fast world. I mean, to make a transition, I mean, people often are like, well, when are you gonna? They always think I'm gonna join the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church, and it's like, you don't know what you're suggesting. Right. You know, I got 3 generations in the Christian Reformed Church, and you don't just, you don't just hop into one of these other things.
I think I was proud of them, weirdly, because you're right. It's disorienting. Yeah. Suddenly you're hanging out with Russians and Greeks. Well, my mom's father is Greek, but that was the time when you were meant to forget about your Greekness. He was, early 1900s. So, but yeah, I think that was an informative time. They were slower.
So when you go to Georgia, you're going to learn. Okay, so I don't know much about Orthodoxy in America, but from the little clues and tidbits I get, you got a lot of Orthodox churches and strip malls and gyms going on right now. Really, some little places, and you've got the big buildings, and we've got some of that in Sacramento. There's a significant Orthodox presence in Sacramento, but you go then to Georgia in the old world. You're going to the source.
It was crazy, Paul. There were churches that were from the 400s, 500s. Yeah. And you would say like, well, really? No, really. Yeah. Yeah. They've been restored. Like, really, there's the foundation from St. Nino. And you're like, what is happening? And I liked history. That place filled me up. That was the most formative moment for my Orthodox Christianity, for sure. Yeah. You can't escape it there. Yeah. The other thing that's crazy, and I would like to talk to you about this sometime, is I learned you can be Christian, much like my experience with Muslims. You can be Christian, you can exude the ethos of Christianity, you can literally know Christ and not even know what the Trinity is.
Yeah.
And it was nuts watching that.
Yeah. That's you said it in a really good way. That's hard, especially in a theologically self-conscious tradition like mine to express, because for a schismatic Dutch Reformed church, the confessional fidelity on one level is supposed to be everything, but you fairly quickly learn that confessionality is one layer of life in the community, and that there are a lot of other layers that you can't just sort of dismiss confessionality, but neither can you dismiss these other layers. They're all part of a whole.
Yeah.
And when they're not actually working together, none of it works. So,
yeah, I saw that too, because remember, they had gone through 80 years of communism.
Yeah.
Off and on. And this was 95. So they're only about 4 years removed. The Georgians don't even know if they're Soviet anymore at the time of the war. The Russians are causing problems in Abkhazia. And so the war with Abkhazia, so without getting all into it, the Russians pushed down and tried to peel away a part of Georgia, which they kind of did officially. But Abkhazians and Georgians, they're really the same people. It's ridiculous. But the point I'm trying to make is it solidified Georgians to claim themselves again, like to remember themselves.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of pride in Georgia at that time. And I was just awash in it because, again, I had no running water, no electricity. It was the same kind of Peace Corps experience. And what you said right there, though, so they're 70 years removed because of communism, and then also trying to recover their orthodoxy. And then they have this influx of monks, and all the monks are sort of doing what I was doing at the same time. Like, like all of the atoms are dancing beautifully, all these Orthodox atoms, and they're putting them all together. And there was a lot of joy, even amidst all the suffering. And so that was impactful to watch the monasteries, because we worked with a lot of monasteries in delivering food aid. And yeah, I like what you're saying, though, because a lot of those monks they were just loving the church didn't even know why. They weren't even clear all the time. And now I think it's different. Georgia's a great place, Paul. It's overwhelming how much it affected my life. In fact, this shirt, Tamada, is the Georgian Toastmaster, and we just opened a restaurant based on the Georgian Supra for our nonprofit. Long story short, every time, so I'm working right on the Turkish border. So not only is Georgia very isolated, but the Turkish border was a demilitarized zone since the Soviets, were meeting basically the West. And so the Soviets had shut that down for all foreigners. Now it's 1995, 94, 95. And I'm the first American in that region. And so I got invited to one of these special dinners, literally like 4 or 5 times a week. And if you get invited and you don't drink, now you got to realize they're poor at this time.
Yeah.
You don't drink, it's really rude. And I was hammered on a regular basis.
Oh, God.
you think it's funny? I'm telling you, it'd be like Thursday morning, and then they'll say, Johnny, come tonight, super in my house. I'd be like, I just went to one last time. They go, oh, you're blessed. I was like, no, they're gonna make me toast, and oh Lord, it's gonna happen again. And it would happen.
So, all right. So you're there for a little while. You haven't talked about, did you pick up a wife along the way? Are you still single at this point? I mean, what's going on here?
Single. Lord, can I tell a story?
Yeah.
I'll keep it quick. It could go long. It won't go long. In Georgia, like many Eastern European and really old world altogether, when someone loses their husband, who's a respected husband, and he gets killed in war, they won't remarry. Not in that not in that same region, not in that village anyway. Now, so there was a woman I met, of course, because this is what happens. And I'm 26 and single or whatever. And her name is Eka. She's wonderful. She's very gorgeous and kind. And she has a little son. And of course, I'm a fool and I like her. But I like it like a dumb American would like a woman. Like, let's see what happens. No. It goes fast, Paul. It goes from 0 to 100 really fast in that village. And, like a fool. And so, but nothing romantic. Well, I mean, a lot's romantic going on in the unseen way, but nothing physical. And I thought that was a great threshold. That was like very good. That wasn't enough. And her father almost put a hit on me, and I'm not exaggerating. Like, it was a very dangerous situation. But I did love her, and I didn't. But at the same time that was going on, I had met a woman back in America, and I had met her right in that interim between when I came back from Africa and then went again back overseas to Georgia. And that woman was incredible to me. She was wonderful, but she wasn't Orthodox, and she was thinking about it. And in the interim, while I'm in Georgia for a year and a half, she becomes Orthodox. on Pascha, actually. And when I got wind of that, I bought a ring in Georgia.
Wow.
And said, okay, I'm going to bring this home. And, we hadn't dated, but I was like, just in case. And I got home. Yeah, I got home and I eventually asked her, and she's my wife, 25 years.
Congratulations. That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yes. You saw her in the picture of me. I was together with her.
Well, that's how I figured. I mean, there's a picture of you and a woman, and I thought, well, probably a wife.
Let's hope it's my
guess.
wife.
That'd be my guess. It's just random women and pictures on your Zoom thing. Maybe, we got to figure out what kind of guy this is.
You didn't know what you signed up for.
Oh, I never do. I talk to randos on the internet all the time.
I know. I heard that. By the way, I went and saw your reason for the channel video. I like that. It was very helpful, by the way.
So you came back to the United States, married her. Now, I'm kind of working from the end here, and you got this First Things Foundation. At some point, all of this overseas experience, that's not going to be wasted, obviously. You came back to the States, and then what?
Asked Helen to marry me. I went back to work as a teacher, ended up teaching another 8 years in the city.
In public school?
Yeah. 2 years on Martin Luther High School, Martin Luther King High School, which was basically Midtown on the east side, west side. Okay. It served kids from Harlem mostly. Okay. And then South Bronx High School, and then I did 2 years on Long Island.
Okay. Where in Long Island?
Huntington Station.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm even forgetting the high school right now. What am I talking about? I know this high school. Glen Cove. It was in Glen Cove.
Okay.
So basically, which was all good. I was settling in, but then my wife was, let me put it this way. I loved my new faith, and it was informing everything we were doing as a married couple. But I had never thought she would go overseas again with me, but she did. And we took 3 of our little girls to Haiti and became missionaries there for a year.
What year?
1999, 2000.
Okay. All right. I was gone then. All right.
Oh, you were there.
I was in the DR. I was just in Barona, just on the other side of the Haitian border.
Oh, well, there's a lot happening on that border.
Yeah,
that's for sure. Yeah, we did that. And that was really hard for me and really wonderful for her. Basically, she was at home. In America, we're scrambling. She had a job. I had a job. But then she was at home the same way my mother had been. Yeah. And it was really good for our kids. But I tell you, I struggled. I saw people I saw a lot of stuff like you. But Haiti has Haiti has its own rhythm, and the people are much more cynical than any place I've been. I love languages. I spoke Haitian Creole well. I'll tell you one thing that's really interesting. The Bambara that I learned in West Africa, of course, was exported through the slave trade to places like Haiti. And it wasn't so much the words, the vocabulary had changed, but it was the construction. And you could actually see the construction in the way that the Haitian Creole had been put together. I mean, it was obvious. I studied both. And I would tell them stuff like that and speak it really well, and they would believe me, but they never adopted the idea. The Haitian people I knew would never say, yeah, we're speaking an African language. They were like proud. This is our language. This is our own language. And learning that and learning about Haiti but I tell you, I could not crack. To create the authentic relationship in Haiti was very difficult. It was very difficult. And I think I failed there. I think I would call that failure. I think I was a little too headstrong. I was still in that control mode that my folks had. I call it light people mode, people of the Enlightenment mode. We love to control, command, and control. We're good at it. The world all looks up to it in some ways, but boy, I don't know if it's good for us. Especially as a Christian.
That's good. That's good. I like that. I'll probably steal that. I steal what I like. It's very bad. Pastors are thieves. Don't give them ideas that they like, or they'll not give you credit. I'll
Pastors are thieves. That's another. Can I steal that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just true. We hear words and ideas. It's like, I can use that.
Oh, you gotta be my guest.
All right. So you come back from Haiti because that didn't. And so
not the way I'd hoped.
No. So you come back and then what?
I come back, and that's when I ended up teaching a little bit in Long Island. I went through the process of getting tenure there. So I don't know if you know about Long Island high schools, but they're serious biz. I mean, you can make more money in a Long Island high school teaching than you could at most universities for sure.
Wow.
And so they have a very, very formidable tenure process. And I went through it and I got it, but boy, did I hate it. I realized I couldn't really do this. I just hated it. I just hated everything about that system. And so
well, you've tried a lot of things that, I mean, this isn't a criticism.
Sure.
You've tried a lot of things that it was like, no.
I know it's a danger.
It's interesting.
It's a danger.
It's interesting.
I think it's an entrepreneurial. My brother has it too, who's this Orthodox priest, Father Peter. He's got an entrepreneurial spirit too. And my mom had it too.
So you got tenure, but that wasn't right. So, I mean, you're restless.
Yeah. I was wearing my prayer robe to teach at this very secular school, and that set some bells off, and probably shouldn't have done that. That's a fact. It was so funny. There were the little enclave of Orthodox kids there. It was really funny. And they used to come and like hang out in my room. And they were like, I can't believe you wear your prayer robe. That's so cool. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. But then they were the ones defending me when something happened, which I won't tell you about, although it's fascinating. And I started to think, this is not good. I don't want to do this. This school is a fine school. I just don't belong here right now.
Right.
So I went down, I took an offer from a friend of mine to be involved in starting a high school in Naples, Florida, an independent school. And I got to write the curriculum for this high school. Wow. With my friend. And that was 2004 or 5. And then I worked there for 10 years and we built the high school. I don't want to sound there was a middle school and they wanted people to come and use expertise to create the high school. So
was this a religious community?
No, it was an independent school, but with a lot of, I call them open-minded thinkers. Okay. They could hear, they could hear the morality of the ancient philosophers and think of it not, there's a lot of Christian overlap in Neoplatonism and all that. And so they liked all that. Now, if you go too hard on the Christ thing, that didn't go very well, but you also you would need to go somewhat on it. So it was a nice mix, for me and for my friend Aaron, who really was the head of the school. I was not. And that high school, it was a beloved place for a little while. And then eventually it's still down there. It's a good place, Seacrest Country Day School. And then I got restless again with my family and had all these crazy artist daughters. I have 4 daughters and basically raising them, I saw that they were really creative. And basically I thought, well, let's keep going with this. And then we started First Things down in Florida, of a friend of mine.
Okay. Well, tell me about First Things then.
Well, basically, in its simplest form, it's what the Peace Corps is without all the government-to-government intervention or interaction. It's really person to person. So we go where we're invited by local people who either recognize our mission as good or I have previous relationships with. So we're in Mozambique right now, partly because of your friend, Sarah. They have a farm there that goes way back. That's a whole Protestant missionary conversation. But they have a farm there. They know the local community and they love the fact that we would place 2 people there and start to do local projects that don't have anything to do with the farm. So that's how we'll be in Mozambique. We got invited to Sierra Leone through a monk who liked our work and we started close to him and now we don't work with him, but he's right there. So basically it's the notion that this is the bet. You're in Sacramento, right? The bet is if I came to Sacramento, to your neighborhood, it doesn't matter, whatever neighborhood it is, and we collected 100 people, that between 8 and 9 people will have an entrepreneurial, or if you don't like, I don't like that word because it implies money or business, but they'll have some sort of creative desire and outlet and have a lot of other problems along with that. But they'll have this notion that's beautiful and everyone can respect it in that local community. And they know them to be important to the community. Yeah. But they can't do everything because nobody can do everything. And so the project always hits a bump. we needed a lawyer to figure out if we can actually move our fences to create this better farming situation. And, I don't know a lawyer. I don't really read and write in Spanish too well. We work in Guatemala. I could really use a lawyer, and then it dies. Or money is often what they need. Or like in the case of the bridge I told you about, what they really need is someone to intervene between the French and them. And I always find that, like, in your life, probably you could use someone who would say, I'll work for you 20 hours a week for free. You'd be like, what? Well, why? Because I like your idea. So we just get this little army, this little crew of people that will give up their life for 2 years at a time and go without a project plan, but go with a training. And the training really is in the art of relationships. It's really, we train people in the art of slowing down and knowing that the work will be born out of the relationship, not the other way around. You can do it the other way. Most development is done the other way. Great idea. Now I got to find the right people. And of course, there'll always be a volunteer for the right, because they think money's coming. You know what I mean? Like, they're always going to say, yeah, we would sure love a bridge here. They're like, are you sure? So my point is, if you flip it, I find it's really in alignment with proper Christianity, which is, I'm a servant first. And so tell me what you need. The problem is you have to be good at recognizing who doesn't need your help. It's a weird, like, it's an inversion. You have to sift people, because when you're a foreigner, especially in America and in tough neighborhoods, you got to watch out. There's a lot of scams going on. I don't mean people just trying to take your money or your possessions. They're telling you things that aren't true because they want your influence. So our job is to slow down. So we don't do anything for the first 6 months that involves project building. We serve local people. So our guys in Africa work for a carpenter there. Now I'm talking about a carpenter that is doing, he's using these big axe handles to shave his wood. And our guys go and do that for 4 hours a day. And everyone's like, why is this dude doing this with you? And we're like, well, he's learning the culture. He's learning to serve. Then after 6 months of learning the language and the culture, then we put folks to work to try to find those local, those enzymes that have really good potential. And we call those people our impresarios, the people who create the project. And then we work behind the scenes to create resources for their project. And that's what we do.
That's very cool. I really love that. There is a ton of wisdom in that, because I've seen exactly what you've described how many times when, oh gosh, and I think back over my years there. I was just in one of my walks the other day. I was just thinking how, he come over there as a young man. What a knucklehead. Gosh, what a knucklehead. And I just think about the way I was seeing the world compared to the way some of these, 60, 50, 60-year-old pastors were seeing the world. And, and it's just, it's extremely weird now looking back on it that I'm at the age of the guys I was working with then. I would think if some 25, 26, 27-year-old alien dropped out of the sky and, had all kinds of money and power and access. And I'd kind of think, yeah, some connection to that money, power, and access, that'd probably be a good thing. But from the Earth's point of view, you'd have absolutely no idea the implications. This is part of the difficulty on Hispaniola. You're so close to the United States that
yes.
And there's so much history of really bad relationships, really dysfunctional relationships from both sides using each other in ways that over the long term are undermining both communities. So anyway, but
I'll tell you this, our very first attempt was Ethiopia. The co-founder, my buddy Ryan Job, he went, and you describing something really important. He didn't do the thing they kept waiting for him to do, which was introduce a series of, you can call them curriculums or steps or investments. He just rode bikes with the guys he met. And eventually there was a guy who was mowing lawn, and he was like helping him mow the lawn. And then that guy turned out to be our first potential project, because he was going to start a lawn mowing business. And here's what happened. Because he did so little, they eventually wrote him off and would just invite him to go drink with them. Like, he just became a normal person. Then he gets filled up with all these, he starts to hear normal people talk about what they need. Totally different experience.
Yeah.
The problem is you have to, we always ask an interview question when people are being interviewed. And we are looking for 2 people from Mozambique right now. Why do you want to do this work? Yada, yada, something along that line. And the minute they say, well, I really want the world to be a better place, or something along those lines, X. It's not happening.
Yeah.
You're not the one. It's not happening. It's not happening.
Well, and the speed issue you mentioned is so critical in that, because okay, you're coming down, and I was a long-term missionary. So you're coming down and you're, at least, my wife and I, we thought we were going to be there, our entire careers. I was working with career missionaries. But you've got objectives and you've got plans, and you've got to send the plans up north, and the funding comes down, and in our relationship with so we were working with Haitians who were for the most part illegal in the Dominican Republic. They were pretty clear on what they wanted from us. And it was a degree of status and money and security. And they were also pretty clear, because we weren't the first dog and pony show they had seen coming down. They had all worked with, successions of dogs and pony shows. And they pretty much understood that what we needed to demonstrate to North Americans were, stories of transformations and numbers. That's what North Americans wanted.
Oh my gosh.
And so, and I was working, we had a denominational mission agency, and our denomination has a history of real generosity, but also, also a degree of discipline and competence. And so we understood some of the dangers of dependency. But I'd seen a lot of independent missionaries come through, and I was just watching the transaction happen, and it's like, I don't want to have anything to do with this. Right. But one of the things that, and we can get into my story if you want to, as much as you want to. But one of the things that really, the big transformation that I left after 6+ years there, was that everything that I thought I was bringing to them wasn't of much of any good. That, and I look back and I just think that the pastors that I worked with and the people that I worked with, they were patient and they were generous with me. And, I certainly left there with far more than I gave. I believe that.
But what do we do with this, Paul? I had this, I think I referenced it earlier. I had this similar, I don't think I did anything good when I was in Haiti.
Yeah.
But is it true? I don't know. I have a problem with this. Well, I have a problem with it right now, even as we run First Things. I try to tell folks, I don't think you can see yet. But the problem is what you said, is that people are measuring using a certain stick. And that stick always has to do with some sort of income to wealth ratio or something. And that's fine. I don't think that's not important, but there's so much unseen that will grow if you have the right relationship and you loved people there. I know what you mean. I don't think you didn't do anything. I don't believe that. I just don't know what to point to. I can't point to much.
Well, I think if we would flip this around the other way, you could look at, let's say, your parents and say, well, what did my parents do? That's not necessarily an easy question to answer, but that there was value there. And it's just like you said, we've got a real problem with yardsticks. And especially, so in the Christian Reformed Church, we had a lot of older mission work that had, you would send somebody to Africa or one of these other places that a lot of missionaries go, because there are certain places in the world that a lot of missionaries go. There's other places in the world that nobody went.
So funny.
You send people to these places where a lot of missionaries go, and they're there for 30 years, and they come back, and they've got the stories and the trinkets. My wife's my wife's parents were missionaries to Nigeria
Oof,
when she was a little, when
interesting.
she was a child. And so, and then, 20, 30 years later, it's like, well, what's happening there? And what have we done? And so then, a lot of this has to do with waves that have gone through the North American church too, in terms of Protestantism. The seeker movement from the 80s and 90s was very big about applying management by objective to the institutional church.
Right.
And okay. And it was a catastrophe. It's too much, but that's just the problem.
Is it okay though?
You can't say it's a catastrophe, but you also know that no, it's been abandoned because we pretty quickly learned, and then the next generation kind of kicked back on it. And that's part of the Protestant problem, is that you just get these successive waves of revolutions and kicking back on, back and forth and back and forth. And at least, but Protestantism is so large and messy anyway. So, all right, I don't know if you want to launch in on me, go right ahead. Because I do.
Let me ask you one thing. How long were you? So you were going to go to the Dominican Republic for your whole life? That was the plan?
25 years old, newly married. What the hell do I know?
Right, exactly. But it wasn't like a 2-year stint. It was
no. It was an indefinite term of service. And
did you feel the structural change to something like your soul when you came back, or were you feeling it happened there? Because I didn't feel it in Haiti till I came back.
Yeah. So it's the problem when people ask me questions is, even on YouTube, there's not enough time. So I don't know how much time you have. So my father, I grew up just outside of New York City.
Oh, okay. So you know New York.
Yeah. And my father, my grandfather was a Christian Reformed minister who pastored churches all throughout the Midwest and a little bit into Canada, starting, at the beginning of the Depression, all the way through the Depression, and then he retired in the 70s. And so my grandfather pastored those churches, and so my father grew up as a PK, as a preacher's kid, in mostly rural places in the United States where Dutchmen were trying to do farming and have dairies, because that's what Dutchmen do when they come to the States, because that's what they know. My grandfather's family, however, we didn't learn this until just a few years ago. My grandfather's family were Jews, and we have no idea why they got to Western Michigan. And then my grandfather's mother died in childbirth, bearing their 6th child. And then my great-grandfather had to quickly marry someone to help raise the kids and raise them in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And my grandfather became a pastor, and, married. The wedding day of my grandfather and my grandmother, my great-grandfather died. And so they had to cancel the wedding while they sat.
On the day itself?
On the day itself.
Oh, Lord.
So they had to cancel it. In the morning, he had a stroke. So my grandfather sat by the bedside of his father for that day. Then they just had a quick little ceremony at the church. And then the next day, my grandfather and my grandmother jumped in the car and drove to Wisconsin Rapids to pastor a church.
That was that.
Next day, dad died, marriage in the car, get out there and start being a pastor.
You mean they didn't have more me time?
And so there was there in Wisconsin that my father was born, and my grandfather, he didn't have, so my father was born in 1935. My grandfather, those churches, they'd feed the domini, that's the pastor, the Lord. They'd feed the domini with what they get from the farm, but they didn't have a lot of cash. So every week my father would drive to the hospital to pay another $1 on the $14 bill that the hospital had for my father's birth.
Wow.
$14.
And he would get a little chunk of it and drive it
Here's
over
a
there.
dollar. You drive all the way to the hospital, 30 miles or whatever to bring a dollar to pay an installment on the, so that was, so that my father then grew up during the Depression and then the Second World War. And my grandfather was kind of a boring preacher, but he really loved people well. And he had just a variety of churches. And then my father followed in his footsteps. And my father went to Christian school, because in the CRC, you'd always go to, when the immigrants came over, they started churches, and the next thing they started was their school, because you wouldn't trust, these Americans educating your children. They
No,
would be covenant
exactly.
youth then.
Yeah.
So
And the CRC wasn't alone. That was almost everybody's.
Yeah.
The Catholics did it, right? A lot of people did it.
Yep.
Interesting.
So then my father went to Calvin Seminary, Calvin College and Calvin Seminary. And he had 2 job offers after seminary, one to Northern Alberta, and the other to Paterson, New Jersey, where it was now in the white flight era of people moving out of Paterson and out to, some of the suburbs. And then his job was to take this little mission that was just sort of a mission to the African Americans that were moving up from the South into Paterson, taking those jobs and escaping Jim Crow.
Right.
And then my father's job was to kind of transform that into a functioning church from what had been sort of a mission station type thing. And so and unlike his father, my father lived in Paterson for 36 years in that one church, doing ministry in that one church. And so that was very much how I grew up. And so it was looking back on it, was just normal for me because you're a kid. But so the neighborhood and the church and the community in which I was raised was very much African American. But then the day school was Dutch CRC, which was sort of suburban Dutch immigrant. So what that built into me was a lot of cultural sensitivity, because very early on, I knew that different people work with sort of different operating systems.
Well, guess what? My dad was a mission priest in Douse, all Black neighborhood. All my friends were Black until I was about 7.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're right. There is a similar structure to all this.
Yeah.
So in the Dominican Republic, then this is the way. So you were drawing on that multi-diversity culture thing to understand your experience. I look like my father, except he had more hair because my grandfather was bald. I look like my father. I sound like my father. I acted like my father. I was interested in religion and theology. So people would call me Little Rev. And so when I go to college, I wanted to be anything but my father. And so I studied math, I studied engineering. Eventually I settled on history. But I had no idea what I wanted to do. And then I really enjoyed theology. So I thought, well, I'll go to seminary when I'm done with college, but I'm not going to go into a local church. It's definitely what I don't want to do. Because that's what your dad had done.
My dad had done. And definitely not a church like the one I grew up in, which is of course exactly what I wound up doing. But and then I met a girl and fell in love, and her parents had been missionaries in Nigeria when she was very young. And so she very much wanted to be a missionary. And I thought, well, that sounds fine.
You could roll that. That's in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, that's fine. So then we were going to go to Brazil, but that didn't work out. And so then I did an internship in the Dominican Republic and was there. And they're like, well, you've been here for a year. Why don't you stay? And my wife had been a Spanish major in college, so she spoke fluent, very nice Spanish. I learned Spanish in the Dominican Republic. And so now whenever I speak, if people look at me like, where are you from? Right. Because I have an accent.
You're dropping certain letters.
That's right. Exactly.
They eat so many letters in the Dominican Republic.
So, and so we went there, and first there was a real big cultural transformation for me because, when I first get there, we're staying in this mission house and we have this Black housekeeper. And I've grown up with racial reconciliation stuff from my youth. And it's like, I'm the white guy with the Black housekeeper, I'm the
You're that guy.
I'm that guy. And so, and then I'm working with the Haitians, and the Haitian pastors are like, you go to a worship service and they put the chair up in front and you sit there. It's like, I don't want to sit in front. You sit
Exactly.
there.
Wow, I had the same experience.
You sit there. You're going to be our patron, and you're going to look out for our needs, and you're going to take care of us. And I had, I'm a Protestant egalitarian. It's like,
That's
no,
right.
no, we're all equals. And the pastors are looking at me like, no,
Give
you
me a
don't understand
break.
your job. We're not all equals. You're going to tell us what to do, and we're going to do it, except we're really going to tell you what to do.
That's
and
right.
Then
We are going to play a role. It was nuts. So
Yeah.
true. So
yeah,
true.
yeah. So we were there a number of years, and some things, are on YouTube, so I'm not going to get too specific, but some things meant that we really should go back to the States. And then we came back to the States, and we needed to do some healing and some recovery. And so we were in Grand Rapids for a little while. And then after that, it's like, I was fixing computers and teaching people computers just to put some food on the table. We had 3 little kids at that point. And then it's like, I could probably make a little bit more money if I'd use this degree that I have. And I start looking at churches, and I have one job offer to a, reasonably successful church in Chicago, to a staff position, and another job offer to be the solo pastor of this little church in Sacramento. And I get out here, and it's like, well, it's not Patterson, because Sacramento and Patterson are 2 very different places.
That seems different. Yeah.
But church was built about the same time, and mostly African-American. And it's like, that's what I know. And so I come here, and, after not too long of doing this here, it's like, wow, I really love this. So,
is that what happened? You fell in love with it?
Yeah. I really love this. I really love, pastoring a little church. And, we had my father did a ton of work with just, he was very much a community pastor. Everybody knew him as Rev, and everybody knew his car, and everybody knew him in the, little area of Patterson where we worked. And here in Sacramento, it was different. There was homeless people. Now we have a lot more homeless people, a lot of poverty. A lot of people in the church had children of disabilities. A previous pastor of the church had done a lot in terms of disability ministry. So there were some different angles from Patterson, but no. And then, I have 2 more kids. So we totally had a total of 5 kids.
I mean,
5 kids. Yeah.
5 kids.
And
4.
and we've been here in Sacramento for 25 years. And then about, 5 years ago, I was always interested in thoughts and ideas, and I'd blogged and played around with things. And then Jordan Peterson came along, and Freddie, you can still find the Freddie and Paul show on my channel. And people don't understand, why on earth my channel is the Freddie and Paul show, especially the YouTube algorithm. But that's where my channel started, with the Freddie and Paul show. Freddie comes up to me one day, says, "Pastor Paul, why don't you and me have a TV show?" Like, he was going down to public access. It's like,
I heard you say that on the other video.
You can do that.
I don't think I'm doing public access.
I don't think I'm doing public access. I said, "Freddie, why don't I just record this and I'll put it on YouTube?" So for about 1.5 years, we had about 5 or 10 people that watched the Freddie and Paul show. And his mom's on sometimes, and his mom's boyfriend's on sometimes, and other people at the church are on sometimes. And then people are always like, why don't you write a book? When are you going to write a book? Because I was interested in ideas and things like that. But
yes,
I realized,
and you are. That's what drew me to you. I love listening to you talk about ideas.
But I knew if I wrote a book, my mom would buy one. People in my church would buy one because they're being nice to me. But who's going to read the thing, really? Because I know other pastors that write books, and how many people read those books? The Pareto distribution. Most of those books are way down here. It's like, I'm going to spend all that time writing a book, and maybe it'll be worthwhile for me, but
no.
And so then I'm watching this Jordan Peterson stuff happen, and I want to talk to people about it. And who am I going to talk to about this? Who's watching? A few of my colleagues were actually watching, some of them, but they, didn't want to admit it. And so I thought, I'll make a video. And then things just, I had no idea what YouTube was and what could happen. And so Yeah, we've been doing that ever since. So
This is crazy.
it's insane. It's absolutely insane.
And now, can I? So, to a confession and a question. I'm not going to reach up and grab it. Maybe I will. I wrote a book too. I had the same question. Who's going to read this? And the answer is not very many people. Mine's a novel, though.
Really?
Yeah, you can
A
get it on
novel?
Amazon.
What's it about?
You can get it on Amazon. It's called the little, it's the story of divine ascent in one, and divine, or how should we say, redemptive destruction in the other. So it's a story of a love triangle. It takes place in Harlem, and it involves it's a shadow conversation about my all authors are putting things in there about the people that they know and love.
Absolutely.
So my wife has quite a story to tell. I don't tell it in the novel, but lots of the spiritual parts of the story I tell. And so eventually it's about New York City public school kids raising up and burning down Livingston Street.
Wow.
And in the melee of all that is this love story that ends in, well, we'll leave it up for the three people who might still read it. It ends in a twist. So it's really about it's an ancient uptown love triangle. That's what I call it. And so I try to hearken into these deep ideas about Christianity by demonstrating what happens when somebody gets all in their mind. And basically the guy in his mind ends up starting a revolution, much like the Bolsheviks in their mind. And then eventually what happens is it comes apart, and there's some violence that is nasty that breaks out.
Comes apart in the real world.
Right. We always think this thing is separate somehow, but it's always being manifest in the real world. And so I wanted to talk about that. I think that was part of what I learned from all these trips, and you must have learned it in the Dominican Republic, is that ideas are really, really real and dangerous, but I think we take them for granted sometimes. I don't think I think it's happening right now. I think that's why you're a part of this Pajot thing, underground thing, is that all the ideas that have been alive and well in Western society that people have all taken for granted for whatever reason, the American teenager, which is sort of the what we are as a nation, that teenager has become so cynical that people are looking for meaning. I think you're a part of that conversation, that people are looking for something deeper. It's pretty cool, but it's dangerous,
It is dangerous.
Dangerous
and not unlike myself when I was 26, 27 years old in the Dominican Republic, I'm not entirely sure we know what we're doing. In fact, I'm much more certain that we really don't know a lot of what we're doing, but we're sort of feeling around.
But may it be for beauty and goodness. I find what's happening on the internet. So I'm in the little Orthodox world, wherever that is. We don't have many viewers, but on our podcast, we have consistent, beautiful, wonderful supporters, because part of it is for our nonprofit. But we've had Pajot on, the author of Loris, which is a really famous novel in Russia.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting his name. Eugene Vodolatskin came on. We've had really cool guests. What I'm trying to say is the conversation is weirdly desired right now. And the conversation is something about what is heaven, what is earth, how do they get united, what is the old world, what is new, what wisdom have we lost? There's an inherent understanding that something's not right. I don't know. I don't think I'm lying, though. I think I'm telling the truth about the inherent desire, but what do you do with it? That gets dangerous. I know. Yeah.
Well, you talk a lot about this. Well, talk to me about this old world, new world thing, because that seems to come up in your stuff.
Yeah. Basically, the podcast is an attempt to go back to these experiences of our field workers and of my life too, my wife, and draw out, like, what is female mutilation? Why are they doing that? And then try to explain it. And I don't want to say demystify it. That's the opposite, actually. It's mystical by nature. But to show what is actually happening there, maybe much more or much less than you think is happening based on your Western rationalist understanding. In other words, yes, it's not good, that one. But we talk about all kinds of stuff. What is dating? what is race in the old world. So we tried to create, it's a bit of a false dichotomy, but old world here, pre-enlightenment, because I think you would say this, tell me, I'll ask you, the places where you've lived, to me, Mali was just Europe 1300, for better or worse, but I found it for better. It taught me a lot. So there's all these lessons about West Africa and the Georgian Republic that are really relevant today if you open a little bit your mind and you hear it. So I'm trying to present these stories differently, old world, new world. I'll give you an example, like death and dying. We just did one. I mean, the Christian idea of remembrance, right? Christ is remembered in the Orthodox liturgy. And I know I pick on Protestants on the podcast, forgive me, but I hammer, but it's out of love, man. So, but the idea of remembering Christ and is to put back together, to literally remember. So Christ is present. And so in the old world, to die is to diabolos. It's to, in the Greek, it's to be degenerate. It's to separate and fall apart. And so what they're doing in all those really weird mystical, like in the West African Juju religion, they're trying to remember the dead through all these sacrificial experiences, cutting off chicken's head. They're literally trying to keep the dead remembered. But we hear that as like, yeah, I remember old Aunt Nancy. It's that, but it's also this other thing where they're alive in the underworld, and you need to keep them remembered so that you can meet them properly. So anyway, so is that relevant to us in the new world? Oh man, I think it's super relevant, because we talk about forgetting the dead. It's almost like what we do now as quasi-atheists. It's like the point is to forget them. And that's sad to me on some level. It's also, I think, out of alignment with like human flourishing. And I don't think you should forget the dead. I don't think you should try to like stay clear of dead things. I don't know. Do I sound crazy? I don't know.
No, you don't sound crazy. When I hear your old world, new world, so I've lived most of my life in places where you can fairly clearly see the old world, new world line, I think, as I understand it, of what you've been saying. Mm-hmm. And it gets manifest often in the fact that, let's say, Mexicans are building our buildings, cutting our lawn, and picking our food, not simply because those are so-called low-skilled, low-wage jobs, but because our culture has in some ways disabled people born into it from doing these things. Wow. We for a while had a Tongan church, so we've, this area of Sacramento where I live in 2003 was highlighted by Time magazine as one of the most integrated places in the USA. There are just so many different immigrant groups in this area. And unlike Patterson, where you had all of the little ghettos, so you had, you had the Jews in Totowa, and you had the Italians, and, we had the Italian Catholics in Halden, and we had the
East Coast
blacks in Patterson, and, all of that when I was growing up. Here in Sacramento, everybody's just sort of, and doing okay together. So we were renting to a Tongan church that I think our relationship ended because the deacons figured out that the Tongans fundamentally didn't understand the idea of rent or paying it. So but I'd had wonderful conversations with the pastor, who was an immigrant from Tonga, and would talk to me about how, every year he would try to get his kids back to Tonga so that they could, live in the house and, live a Tongan life, or at least visit it. And he'd talk to me about how the kids just, he didn't have words to describe it, but they just couldn't do that. They just couldn't be there, that this country had changed them. And, that's the story, obviously, of even the Dutch immigrants that make up my denomination. It's almost every immigrant story.
Yes.
But for example, I think of a guy in my church growing up. His name was Frank, who was pretty significantly disabled, yet actually managed to marry a woman and have 2 children. Now, it took a fair amount of help from the family and the community to, those boys have since grown up and have become, good men. But I look at how many people in this culture who he earned a living by working in a bakery, cleaning up, doing simple tasks in a bakery. Mm-hmm. The community sort of would come around him and gave him something that he could actually function and create a life. And there is something in our culture that is, on one hand, enabling, people like my children, all who now have college education and they're, in the industrial complex, and they are, they're thriving. They're gonna be middle class, upper middle class, successful, yada yada yada. My wife and I have given that to them, but there's this whole other group, and this is part of course, working in African American communities, where on one hand you've got elements of the community that have thrived, which almost isn't seen by America often, because to be Black in inner city means this one thing, and it's like, there's some of that, but then there's the other, and it's just quite clear that when the old world and the new world meet in American inner cities, you can really see the contrast in a way that you can't see in a lot of other places, because people coming from more traditional cultures, whether that be in Mexico or Tonga or West Africa or even the Dominican Republic. I mean, I could even see it between Dominicans and Haitians. And I could see it between Dominicans and Puerto Ricans.
For sure.
And so there is something about modernity and, whatever post-modernity is, or wherever we're going, there is something pretty severely transformational, but there's also a disabling in that, where, and what I loved about your description of your foundation is, it seems to me that you're actually attempting to provoke a transformation going the other way.
Yeah. For us.
Yeah.
Well, wow, you just hit on, there's about a million things there, but how does one become fully who we're meant to be? If the notion is to build and command and control, I don't think that's the equate. That feels like what God is. We have to become like God through disembarking on the God project in ourselves. We're supposed to become servants, and we see that. So the whole idea, you said it, the whole idea would be, there's somebody in that Tongan community, there's somebody in the African American who already knows. Do we know it's a good project? I don't know. I know that he knows or she knows very well her situation. So let's listen. But to do that, you have to, this is the thing, you have to acquire a degree of humility. And that's the ascetic part of the job, which I feel like the West has lost. The notion of gaining through refusing to acquire. And it's mystical, it's spiritual, but the East Christian East has, I had a monk tell me this. I don't know what you think about this. Again, I'm picking on Protestants, but he said, John, it's like this for you as you come to orthodoxy. Don't trust any tradition that doesn't have monk or nun. They have forgotten something about Christ and cross. And I was like, okay.
But, and I think, though, again, some of the parallels here, part of the reason why when I saw the woke, I thought, I ain't buying this, because when back in the 70s, when I looked at what, let's say, my parents did when they decided that they were going to, live in Patterson, work in Patterson, move to Patterson, dedicate their life to these people. There is very much an ascetic quality to that. And I hear that in the story of your parents. Sure. And I saw that, I think my wife very much saw that in her parents when, they went, to Africa as missionaries, because, they went in an earlier time too, where it was, you get some flights back and forth, but you're filling a barrel and these kind of things. But
I know that phrase.
but and one of the things that I saw with the woke was, I don't take any of these people seriously, because they're Peugeot just did that video on human sacrifice. I thought it was a tremendous video.
I did
And
too.
because the reality is that all of this healthy transformation that leads to the life of the age to come, even while embedded in this world, happens through sacrifice.
Yeah.
And of course, a monk does that, and a nun does that in terms of a radical renunciation. But I mean, part, at least to defend Protestantism, Luther's idea was that would then get instantiated in every household.
Yes,
because,
amen. Yeah,
because
that's right.
The household, in a sense, replaced the monastery. And so, yeah, you could have sex. Yeah, you could have children. but
I think if you keep going, I think it also then got transferred to the workplace.
Yes.
To do the work was your ascetic.
Yes.
That's what this Protestant work ethic is about. And that's why kids in their 20s today have no idea, because they've lost the Protestant wrapper to the conversation. It's not wrapped up in these vocabulary words anymore. So then when a guy comes into our restaurant and then Paul, why is this happening? We'll interview somebody. They seem nice. We seem nice. It's a good match. We'll see you tomorrow. And then they don't show up. Like, it happens over and over again, because I don't think they see that as ethically like a problem. My commitment to my job, what's that got to do with my reality? And I think I like that Luther he moved it into the house. I mean, in the Orthodox East, you find a lot of weaknesses with, there's not people practicing asceticism just because they're Orthodox. I really respect that. And you see it in the early Protestants. The problem right now is it got decoupled somehow, where I don't know that the people in the household growing up believe anymore that that there's value in asceticism. I don't know what happened. What do you think happened? I don't know what happened.
Oh, I mean, Protestants have been pointing this out. John Wesley pointed it out. Calvinists. I mean, part of what happened is the household ascetics, or even the vocational ascetics, that produces wealth and affluence. It's not too dissimilar to the fact that here you have all of these monks with a vow of poverty, and the monastery is fabulously wealthy.
Brilliant point.
And there's no Vikings to come and take their gold.
You see it all the time. And then the new temptation is not the ascetic. To be ascetic, the new temptation is to refuse to imagine that you did that. I think in America, we've gotten comfortable with, look what I did. That's not the way the Protestants, the folks coming over in the boats, would think of their newfound wealth. I don't think.
No. And, the Dutch Calvinists, when they came, I'm amazed at what these people built, because these were immigrants that, my grandfather, my grandfather worked in a machine shop in Whitensville, Massachusetts, his entire life, because of course not everybody could have a dairy, and so the poorer kids, they just went to work in the machine shop by the rivers there in New England. And my grandmother, she outlived him by 10 years, and her money ran out about the same time after she was paying for 10 years of nursing care for herself. They had saved that much. And of course, they had tithed to the church. And of course, they had built the Christian school. I mean, they were living a very ascetic lifestyle.
Yeah.
And part of the difficulty, well, there's this goes into there. Yeah. This stuff is no. So you can't. And okay, so now I'm going to be all Calvinist on us, because you can't. This is all a gift from God. Even the self-denial is a gift from God. The heart that wishes to deny itself for the pleasure of the other. I mean, we're always asking, where is that heart that can transform itself? And that doesn't mean that there's nothing that we there's nothing that we do in terms of of bearing witness to that. Your parents bore witness to that.
Yes,
And even
you
though
to do both.
that's right, even though it took you a while, you had to drink in college and you had to frog around. They bore witness and you got it.
Can I use that term, frog around?
You can use it all you want there. You steal that from me.
As you sit next to your Kermit the Frog. Keep going, I cut you off.
No. And so it's, and that's where we sort of get a level up here, because that instrumentality that is so much at the heart of the Enlightenment project, and which can make it so demonic. I mean, when you look at, let's say, the temptations of Christ, stones to bread, do a Peter Pan from the pinnacle of the temple, just a little knee bow, and I'll put you at the top of my international project. It's all this instrumentality.
Yep.
And what we finally have to give up is, okay, so I mean, and we wrestle this, right from the start with Peter. Peter's like, okay, so the plan is we're going to go down to Jerusalem, and you're going to be turned over into the hands of Gentiles, and you're going to be crucified. And of course, they don't hear the resurrection part, because that's just crazy talk. And this is our plan to make Israel great again, and
you're like, wait a minute. That's the stupidest thing I've ever.
That's right. Jesus, the stilling the storm, the raising the dead.
Where are the chariots, man? What are we doing?
Why don't you make some Roman legions dead? I mean,
exactly.
It's a lot easier to make Roman legions dead. That happens all the time than to raise the dead. So if you can do one, you can do the other. But, and I think, I think part of what I really love about how you've described your foundation and your mission is you are practicing that renunciation, and you are taking the risk, and you are making the space for God to do something. But you also know,
space,
as any of us know, that just because you make the space for God to do something, and when we think something, we're always thinking about, well, this is we want the kind of narrative and storyline that happened in this one community where he went and he farted around for a while, but he built the bridge and the village elders cheered and the slow clap, and even though you might have 10 guys go out there and fart around for 2 years and come back and say, what was that about?
Right. But nothing happened. Right. Yes.
But this is, I mean, we make a lot more mountain altars on mountains, but we do it because of what happened at Carmel.
I mean, that's right. And you know what? I can live with that. Sometimes it's hard to find donors that can live with that. That's a different conversation, both in my own tradition and outside. I will say, though, that we have a number of folks from the Calvinist tradition and various, whatever, however you want to read that, who support us. It's a very weird conglomerate. We have, we sent atheists into the field. This is why one thing that's really cool about the project is it's almost like a test, like, are all souls the same? Are we sure? And the people who believe all the right stuff about orthodoxy, because we get about 50-50, because, our vocabulary attracts Orthodox people. Thank God, I'm all for that. But it's the same for each person that goes. It doesn't really matter. The sacrifice plays out the same way. The sickness, getting malaria, plays out the same way for Orthodox. It doesn't. But what does matter sometimes is that the Christian folks have a vocabulary or an epistemology for describing what's happening to them. And folks who aren't in that tradition can't describe. Although, have you noticed everyone wants a vocabulary now for the spiritual world? Atheists alike, everyone wants their own little book on how to describe things unseen. That's a big shift from just 20 years ago with the new atheists. Wild what's going on.
It's changing. I got a soft spot for the atheists, because it's me too. It's like, hey, we're all way more atheists than we should be, including the pastors. So
Well, the true, you know this from being overseas or wherever in the old world. That's just it's a functional vocabulary word.
Yeah.
But in the old world, there's this other thing that happens where everything becomes about, quote, the mystery. This is also problematic, on lots of levels. And it's not that one is better than the other. It's just wisdom is found between them. We can find that wisdom. One is holy, one is God, the royal path. It's a thing. We can't stay on it. I know you and I were doing this, but it's real. The idea that you would just jettison it because, I can't do it. That's Christ did it. You can't do it, correct, but you shall.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Yeah.
It's another concept.
Yeah. Lord, we'd like to sit at your right hand and left hand. You want that cup?
Sure.
You're because that's, have you ever heard of Elizabeth Elliot?
I haven't. I wish I had more time to read and pay attention.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I'll just tell you who she is. Elizabeth
Yeah,
Elliot.
please.
So there was this, it's so funny. I love listening to Richard Rowland and Jonathan Peugeot talk, because Richard Rowland, of course, he was a Calvinist or something. And so he knows the Protestants, and he knows, when he says, oh, they got all their own icons and saints, it's like, yeah, they really do. Well, Elizabeth Elliot is one of these Protestant, these Calvinist saints. They were missionaries in South America, and her husband, in a very famous incident, Jim Elliot, was killed by the people that they're trying to reach. And it's a very famous story in Protestantism. And then she goes down and, with their children, and she lives in the community, and, it's this amazingly wonderful story. And so she's a hallowed saint. But at one point she wrote a book called No Graven Image, where she basically tells the story, which is just like a lot of other people when they write fiction, basically tells this story about how she's trying to learn this language of this little tribe somewhere. And there's one guy, of course, who sort of knows both languages, and he's absolutely key to the enterprise of translating the Bible into their language. And then he gets sick with something, and because, hey, you're a missionary out in the middle of nowhere. I remember I always had this book, Where There Is No Doctor, because it's like,
yes, I know that book.
Yeah, it's a good book. So, so then you wind up doctoring. So this missionary winds up doctoring the one person who's the bridge person for 5 years of trying to translate the Bible, and she doctors the guy and kills him.
Oh my, I did not see that coming.
And Elizabeth Elliot writes this book, and people are like, the publisher's like, no, we can't publish this book. Why? Well, God would never let that happen.
Yes, oh my goodness.
And it's like, that's why I always tell people, don't play chicken with God. Right. Israel tried it with the temple, and read the book of Jeremiah. Don't play chicken with God, because he will go to lengths, and he will take risks, and he will bear costs that you are not only unable to bear, but unable to imagine.
I know.
And so, but that's so I'll talk to people about the resurrection, and people will say, yeah, but Jesus knew God was going to raise him from the dead. And I'd say, yeah, but it hadn't happened yet. So now that it's happened, does that make it easier for you? Because, little skin in the game here. And it's fundamentally the cruciform nature of the Christian faith that it's simply the most audacious thing. And it's part of, I think, in some ways, because the new world and the old world, as you describe it, I've just heard you talk about it a little bit in some of your podcasts. It isn't really a timeline. We often experience it sort of like timelines, but it really isn't. And it's, so the new world really goes way, way back. And it's when the church, and this is out of which the Protestant Reformation happens, it's when the church gets self-sufficient, corrupt, and it loses the radical giftedness nature of the gospel.
That's right. Yeah, and that's a pattern.
Yes,
and I think that, just not to sound like old Jonathan Peugeot, but for me, America.
Who's younger than both of us?
I know it's weird, right? Jeez, this guy. And his brother is even younger than him, isn't he?
I don't know.
Who knows about that guy? That book, though, is fantastic. Language of Creation. But anyway, the pattern so okay, yes. Again, everything is encoded. I think it's been doing this dance with the enlightened philosophers. Pick one, Francis Bacon, I don't care, Thomas Paine. We could talk about, I don't know. But anyway, those guys, and then this fusion of all this interesting, we call it heterodox theology of the Protestants. And then they're all dancing around this one concept, which is deism for me. It's a fundamental concept. And the deistic inclination is like the prodigal son, right? And you got to remember, the prodigal son has fun. This is one thing. The prodigal son, people forget about this part of the story. He had a party, man. Things were going well. And so deism allowed you to jettison some of the old heaviness and move forward. But the problem is they wake up in the pig pen. And I think right now that's what's happening. Is there was the heterodox fused too much of their Christianity with the deistic and the Enlightenment scientific rationalism and created a bit of an emptiness, a space right now that I think everyone's searching for. A little bit like it got fat, right? It got fat, like the church got fat. You can argue that. Definitely the East argues that about Catholicism. It got off, and the Protestants trying to fix it. That's why I wish you guys, Luther had a bunch of theologians who tried to talk to, I think it was Jonah, the patriarch of Constantinople at the time. Yeah. They went back and forth like 1560s, 70s, and 80s. And the Luther's theologians were trying to get the right answers. It was fascinating that they even knew about it. And eventually they both just stopped trying to get it. So my point is we're in a period now where that conversation, it feels like it's really necessary. But I would look at America almost like a teenager now that's waking up in the pig pen. But what father does it go home to? Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know.
That's a great way to. I'm going to steal that too. What father does it go home to?
This is probably all. This is my brother's stuff. You got to check him out. Bring him on. He'll tell you.
I'll talk to your brother. That's all. I haven't. I haven't. What's his name? DeYoung.
He's another good one. Yeah.
Well, he grew up CRC, so I should talk to him.
He grew up CRC.
He grew up CRC. Yeah.
Father Andrew right now, a lot of people are really appreciative of his work with Father Andrew Damick too.
No, and we know what you say about deism is right. Deism, so I've been, fascinating, and I'm actually working on this in my adult Sunday school class now too. Of course, nobody in my adult Sunday school class knows what I'm doing because they don't watch my videos. But I had my God number one and God number two and law number one and law number two, and that's all trying to crack this business about deism. And I think it has to do. See, Calvinism, I think, in some aspects of Calvinism is, I think, even though it's deeply intertwined with a lot of deism, it's an attempt to break out of this, because deism is fundamentally trying to contain God. It's like deism is like, let's say you decided as some snot-nosed kid who really wanted to game your parents that you think you're a lot smarter than them. So you took careful record of everything that they did. Whenever mom says this, dad said this. And whenever dad does this, then he does this next thing. You should take careful record of everything that your parents did. And then suddenly you imagine, okay, I don't actually need my parents anymore because I have this record of what they do.
That's a nice description. I feel like that's also my childhood. Why did I do that?
But what you've done is and this is what deism does. It takes the living God, and to a certain degree, theology is always in jeopardy of doing this, and takes the living God and turns God into this system of this then. And at least
ones and zeros, and zeros.
That's right.
Ones and zeros.
And Calvinism at least partly wanted to say you can't do that because he will keep breaking your system. And so, there's plenty of issues with Calvinism. You always know, it's like atheists come and say, the problem with the church. It's like, hey, if you and I are going to compare notes, my list of problems with the church makes yours look like nothing.
That's why I loved you. That's why I loved when I was listening to you, because you're super fair and wonderful. And it makes somebody like me from the outside, why would I ever want to go at someone who is recognizing within their own system all the things, by the way, that you should ask us about in the Orthodox Church? We got all kinds of, like, that's not right. What are you doing? But
you got Putin in the Orthodox Church. I can hear that.
Oh,
I listen to people like, well, maybe the Eastern Orthodox Church doesn't have like this history of politics and oppression like the rest. And it's like, people.
But I will say this. This is one part, if I can, we can talk about it. I don't know enough. I will say it's something that's going on in America that does confuse the hell out of us Orthodox, or at least out of this one. What is the small O Orthodox Church? What is that? I don't have any idea what that is. I don't know when Protestants are, Joel Olstein saying the church. I don't know what he is talking about. I swear, you don't laugh. It really drives me nuts. Now, that's not to say that people within the Orthodox Church don't have problems and we fall down and all that stuff, but the church is Christ's body, and it's here. I may not always get it right, but it's
Hang
here.
on a second.
What is it?
I will answer your question. I gotta be a small church pastor for a minute. There's nobody else in the building. I got to answer the door. Yeah, he wasn't a homeless guy. He was a pastor.
Almost the same thing.
You say more than you know.
Apparel.
It's true.
My dad used to always say, we're going to have some mission barrel apparel. So the small O thing. And again, we can dig around with Orthodox people for sure, but our understanding of the church is not like how well our pastor does. It's very weird. The small O, what is it to you? That is really one of my questions I want to ask you. What is this?
Well, I can give you the official answer from the Christian Reformed perspective. It's because you and I share a number of creeds that the Protestants, in some rather weird way, sign off on a whole number of creeds that the Catholics and the Orthodox do. And so that's where we say, well, we all believe in Nicaea. And
okay, all right.
And so we say, at least we have Nicaea, and at least we have the Apostles' Creed, and at least we have the Athanasian Creed, and we got the filioque clause in there, but we'll try not to fight too hard about that. So that's
okay. That's baseline.
That's an answer. Another part of it is this idea that Luther also had, which was the invisible church. And you listen to that, and it's like, what? Because you'll be my witnesses, but you'll be invisible? How's that supposed to work? Mm-hmm. It's the idea that there's something in there's something in other churches that God hasn't fully abandoned, even if they're getting a bunch of things wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's this again, to a certain degree, Calvinism's a weird strain of Protestantism, and people are always poking at this and that, and that's fine. I don't mind people poking, because they're not poking at me, they're poking at this huge system. But part of it is this radical freedom of God, that he can take and use people from very different places, and people who are carrying around very different ideas in their head. And it goes all the way back to Cyrus. Cyrus is the instrument of the Lord. It's like, yeah, Cyrus, Persian.
He's not a good guy. Well, that was the conversation about Trump, right? That was what people were saying. Some.
So
I'm not against that idea. That makes sense.
No, and so there's and ever since, I still don't know near enough about orthodoxy in terms of how you guys manage all the history and stuff that needs to be managed, but it's clear to me that if you read even the letters of Paul, the kinds of tensions between Paul and the Judaizers, what's going on in the Corinthian church, then you read the churches in Asia Minor that John is writing to. I mean, right from the start, church is a really messy place.
Yeah.
Sure. And we try to sort of keep the house clean in some ways by tidying things up with, here we've got a Trinity over here, and we've got Christology, and we've got, two natures, and, and all of this stuff. So we try to tidy the place up, but there's always more messiness. And God, I was actually the video, I don't know if I'm going to do a video this afternoon, but if I do, and I've just really got in my head this whole question about heroes and saints, because I was listening to The Rest is History, and they had in the club, they had a special episode where they talked about heroes. And it's really interesting because, the Greeks had these heroes, and then the age of heroes is supposed to stop, like with the Peloponnesian War, right when you get into a degree of secular history, once Herodotus, starts writing history, then the age of heroes is ended. But really, after Christianity really begins to triumph in the Roman Empire, East and West, you have this inversion now where you no longer quite have heroes in the Greek way, but you have saints.
For sure.
And so instead of conquering by the blood of your enemies, you now conquer by the blood of the saints. And so, this is,
by the way, powerful. Very powerful.
And I get the sense now that we're getting into a time when I think we are seeing the unraveling of a lot of what got raveled in the Enlightenment. And I think we're getting to a point that the protest of Protestantism will come to an end. But, we still have the division between East and West.
That's well said.
And I don't think any of this is going to be resolved in our lifetimes, but we are participating in this work of God in his world. And what's amazing about it is that it is a participation that goes all the way down to, a preacher's kid growing up in Patterson, or a preacher's kid growing up, in Concord. And little places in Africa, we're in Mali working with Muslims to build a bridge. Sure. And that this work of God is just infiltrating and seeping down and doing its thing. And so small O orthodoxy, I think right now the challenge of wokeness, like in my denomination, because I was always a progressive in my denomination because of, racial reconciliation and those kinds of things. But then suddenly I'm a recalcitrant bigot because when everybody's like, whoa, we got to go affirming, it's like, I'm not saying that'll never happen, but you're moving awfully fast here. And, and we gotta slow this down and think and talk and pray. And no, we can't do that because we've got
fix stuff.
We got to fix stuff.
Yeah.
And we've got to set all this stuff right. And it's like, I've seen a lot of people try to set things right. A lot of our problems today are because of the last job of setting things right.
Right.
So I don't know.
I'd only say this is, I love what you're saying. There's no doubt that the Muslim folks who helped me to understand the power of, being obedient to God, they're all a part of the Holy Spirit's activities in the world. I don't know any Orthodox worth their salt that would deny any of that. That's happening all the time. I think the concept with the churches is more like a narrative. So like, who are the Vanderclays? At some point, you just don't get to say you're a Vanderclay and you live in, Southeast Asia, and you never even spoken English once, or you don't know what Dutch is. At some point, you're just so far removed that, yeah, you're still a part of the Holy Spirit's work, but the church, like the Vanderklay household. And so I think for Orthodox, what it is there's this real joy in knowing that something like the culture of Christ keeps going, and I can be out of it or in it. I can, some days I'm closer to it than not, but it actually is a thing, and it's to be attended to. Like, you better not mess around. Like, so some people take that to heart, you know what I mean? You got to use the right word, and then you need to wear the right cassock. And but those are like guardrails to help you remember, but it can be used juridically, you know, to really hurt people. So I know what you're talking about. But for me, when I became Orthodox, it was like, you mean I'm doing it the way they did it? So there's something cool about that, but it's exclusionary. I'll give you that. It can sound arrogant. I think that's the big fight back against it, is that it has an arrogant feel to it, but I never found it that way. I never found it arrogant.
I would have a hard time imagining it would get that way in America, just because it's so tiny.
It's tiny too. It is tiny.
I think probably more of the dangers are it gets that way in places where it's, you know, where it's massive and everywhere. And that's a weird thing, because on some hand, you know, I have that in the Christian Reformed Church, because the Christian Reformed Church is massive and everywhere in a tiny little place called Grand Rapids, Michigan. And it's not even as massive and everywhere there as it used to be. But funny. You know, out here in California, the Christian Reformed Church is like, what? What's
just another thing, right?
It's just another thing. There's more Orthodox here than Christian Reform in Sacramento. I'm sure of it.
Might be.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure it's true.
I think we're coming in under Mormons these days. I think there's more Mormons than Orthodox. Well, are you going to get mad at me if I got to go to this meeting? Remember, you joked around about a board meeting? I have one of those today. Isn't
look weird? At that. Command and control. You've got to be commanded and controlled. No, John, this was absolutely refreshing. I knew when I saw you talking to Jonathan that I'd love having a conversation with you, and I very much wanted to do it. So if you get an idea of something you want to talk about, just shoot me a note, and we'll find it on the calendar.
I'm going to, Paul, first of all, really, I love the way you knew something. Okay, so I was like, okay, he wants to talk about my life. All right, but you knew something. There's a pattern there. I really liked it, because you did find out stuff even during the conversation. I thought, he is like me, but we do have something. That's a nice thing. I found that pastoral. It was good to hear that. I don't know. I feel close to you, man. A little bit like with Jonathan. We don't talk that often, and we write little emails, and it's all fine. But there's something weird about him that I feel close to him already. And then he went to Africa and all that stuff. So anyway, brother, I'll tell you what, maybe you come on to our podcast, talk Old World, New World sometime.
I'd love to. Okay,
super.
Thanks, John.
Super. All right, take care. And tell me how this shakes out and how you'll use it in the future.
I'm going to post it tomorrow. That's how this shakes out.
Oh, that's perfect.
I post it tomorrow. It's real simple.
That's how this shakes out. Well, my buddy Andrew, who's he worked for us in Guatemala, and now he lives married a Russian. I didn't even tell you that story. It's a good story. He does all of our media stuff, and so he's like, I need to know what Paul Vanderklay is going to do. I said, calm down. Now I'll tell him. He'll post it tomorrow.
Just as is. I don't edit.
Thank you, brother. Okay.
All right, John. Take care.
Great,
bye-bye.
Great talking to you. Great.